Mr. Speaker. The Finance Minister of Canada has awesome powers to help or hinder individual businesses, particularly those businesses that deal in products like pensions. A Minister of Finance knows beforehand about government decisions that move markets and push individual companies up or down, and his decisions can impact the direct bottom line of companies in which everyday Canadians invest and for which they work. No one in government has more power over taxation, regulation, tariffs, subsidies, or government bond auctions, all of which have direct impact on the fortunes of individual businesses. He who has the most control over the nation's finances should have the most transparency over his interests. From those to whom much is given, much is asked. When we give ministers the power to impact on the lives of everyday people, we expect that they prove they are exercising those decisions in the public interest and not the private interest. That is especially true of the Minister of Finance, for whom these powers are so vast. Now, we're not dealing with an ordinary Minister of Finance. His father built a billion-dollar financial services firm. According to the last available insider trader reports, this finance minister held over $30 million worth of shares in that family business as of 2015. Since he became minister, he stopped disclosing his holdings, which is greatly ironic. We knew more about his interests before he was finance minister than we do now. Public filings with the insider trading reports ensured that he, as a corporate executive, was accountable to his shareholders. He now has no similar accountability to the 35 million shareholders we call Canadian citizens. And this company is of direct interest to the minister's department. Let me quote from the Morneau Shepell website. Morneau Shepell is the largest provider of pension administration, technology, and services in Canada. We offer a full range of solutions, from software to full outsourcing of pension administration. Who regulates pensions in Canada? Well, the Office of the Superintendent of Financial Institutions. To whom does that office report? Why? The Finance Minister. And I quote, that office regulates, quote, 1,200 pension plans. Interestingly, if you go to Morneau Shepell's website, it makes direct reference to that office, saying that the office appoints Morneau Shepell to wind down the pension plans of bankrupt companies. Company pension plan is going under. The Office of the Superintendent of Financial Institutions needs someone to oversee the pension. In the meantime, they pick from a variety of providers. Of course, there is a financial benefit to whomever is selected, and Morneau Shepell brags on its website that it offers its own services to this office that reports directly to the Finance Minister. There are broad and sweeping regulations at a national level to federally regulated pension plans. Of course, Morneau Shepell offers those pension plans. Pension plans also purchase government bonds. The Finance Minister sells government bonds. Every year, we have new issuances of government bonds as this government runs deficits and needs to borrow money. And past bonds come to maturity and need to be renewed, and they are sold to institutional investors like pension funds, of which Morneau Shepell is one. So the finance minister's family business buys government bonds, and the finance minister sells government bonds. And then there's the issue of taxation. The finance minister, of course, is responsible for setting tax policy for the whole country. That's important for everybody, but especially for companies whose interests and activities are so dramatically impacted by tax levels and tax rules. Allow me to just provide one example. The minister proposed in his July 18th consultation paper to double tax the investment income private businesses earn within their companies. The result is many of them would be forced to take their retirement savings out of the private company and put them in individual pension plans. A very unique and not very well understood product. Few Canadians hold them, and far fewer companies offer them. One of those companies is Morneau Shepell. Now, the minister might say that he didn't take that into consideration when he made his public policy proposal. But we don't know that because we're not familiar with what holdings he continues to possess. Furthermore, the minister has defended Canada's 40-year-long tax treaty with Barbados. That treaty allows Canadian companies and wealthy individuals to pay only 2.5% tax in Barbados and then ship the rest of their profits back to Canada tax-free. The minister's family business has registered itself a subsidiary in Barbados to take advantage of exactly those favorable tax conditions. So the finance minister is responsible for reviewing a tax treaty with a tax haven where his family business has a subsidiary. Now, here's what we do know about the finance minister. His father built this billion-dollar family business. As of 2015, the finance minister was receiving employment income from that family business. And as of that same year, he had $30 million of shares in that company. Since becoming minister, we no longer know if he holds on to those shares. And it's not because the minister hasn't been asked. He has been asked on probably about a dozen occasions, and he simply refuses to answer. Now, for the longest time, most people thought, how could he answer? It's in a blind trust. He wouldn't know. In fact, on Twitter, late last week, I had an exchange with the member for downtown Toronto, Liberal member, who came leaping to the finance minister's defense by saying, come on, this money's obviously in an arm's length blind trust. How could the minister possibly know where his money is? It's all blinded to him. And you know what? I don't blame that Liberal member for saying that, because most of the press gallery thought exactly the same thing. Everybody just assumed that if a finance minister had shares in a financial company, that would have to go into a blind trust. But through 2 weeks of intrepid investigative journalism, the Globe and Mail finally was able to extract the fact that this minister does not have a blind trust. So he knows what he holds. He knows his assets. He knows what they are. Why won't he tell everybody else? Now, some might suggest, well, this is an intimate, private detail that we couldn't possibly ask someone to volunteer to strangers. That's an odd response, given that he was, as a corporate executive, forced to reveal exactly the same facts. Mr. Speaker, am I the only one who finds it peculiar that a corporate executive had a higher standard of public transparency than the Minister of Finance?
You're not alone.
I'm not alone. I think most Canadians would think that the man who directs our taxation, regulation, subsidy, tariff, financial regulation policy in this country and is responsible for $300 billion of public spending would have a higher degree of public disclosure than a corporate executive. But those who would expect that would be wrong, at least under this present government. Now, I have to say I found this particularly surprising because when I was a parliamentary secretary and I opened a very meager stock portfolio, well shy, I won't say exactly how much, but it was well shy of $30 million. Really? I know the members of the House are shocked to hear that. I'm the son of 2 teachers, but the reality is I did not have $30 million. I went to the ethics commissioner and she said, yes, I'm afraid that is going into a blind trust.
Did you clean your bill?
So at the end of the day, I put that in a blind trust for as long as I held it and maintained that blind trust separate and out of my control. Now, if we think a parliamentary secretary should not be able to know what he or she owns in the stock market, why on God's green earth would we expect it to be appropriate for the finance minister to own tens of millions of dollars of interests without either putting it into blind trust, divesting it altogether, or at the very least, telling the public what he holds? You know, during the Paul Martin era, he owned Canada Steamship Lines. Now, I thought it was particularly egregious the way that finance minister arranged his affairs, reflagging his ships in order to avoid paying the same taxes that he imposed on other Canadians. But at least we could debate those facts in the Martin era because we knew them. He, at least to his credit, made clear to Canadians that he had this massive shipping empire under his command and then subsequently under the command of his children while he was pulling the financial strings of the country. Today, we're expected to just trust the finance minister and assume he wants us to have blind trust in him, even though he doesn't have a blind trust himself. This is the same minister who already broke the requirements of the Ethics Act by covering up his offshore corporation in France, which owns his villa there. A villa that may produce rental income that, of course, would not be taxed in Canada because it would be held in that shell corporation offshore. Meanwhile, the minister wants to impose higher taxes on private corporations here in Canada. The mom and pop grocery store that can't afford the lawyers and these consultants to set them up with an offshore company in France will pay higher taxes on their passive income. Meanwhile, his policy allows him to continue to accumulate riches abroad, out of the reach of the same tax system he would impose on everybody else. Now, Mr. Speaker, going back to the parliamentary secretary earlier, when that member for downtown Toronto told us over Twitter that his minister had a blind trust, somebody asked him why. He responded, "It's the law," with 9 letters A, in order to emphasize the importance of the law. Now, I think I honestly believe that member thought that the minister would have to have a blind trust in order to function in any kind of ethical environment and avoid conflicts of interest. And I think now, I think we should all turn our thoughts to the junior staffers in ministers' offices who make modest middle-class incomes, that have to put their $5,000 RRSPs in a blind trust, and what they must be thinking about a minister on the front bench who not only couldn't be bothered to respect that principle, but thinks he is entitled to hide his interests and potential conflicts from the Canadian people who pay his salary. Mr. Speaker, that is emblematic of the kind of entitlement that the millionaire finance minister and the millionaire prime minister have come to possess. Now, I understand why they would be out of touch. They don't appreciate that everyday Canadians don't have multi-million-dollar trust funds handed down to them from their grandparents and their parents. The Prime Minister has been very blessed with what he likes to boast of as his family fortune. His grandfather ran an oil and gas empire, and the Prime Minister today is still living off of the fruits of his grandfather's hard work and labor. The Finance Minister has been very blessed to come from a family that built a billion-dollar family business. Both of them are very well taken care of by these family trusts that they enjoy and the inheritance that have been passed down to them. And you know what? I do not begrudge their families for the success, but I ask that they hold themselves to the same standard as everyone else. Average Canadians pay higher taxes under this government, but we saw how the Finance Minister and the Prime Minister meticulously designed a tax increase targeted at local businesses and family farmers that would protect their family fortunes. The billion-dollar family business of the Morneau Chapelle of the Finance Minister is publicly traded, so it faced no new taxes under this latest attack on small businesses. The Prime Minister went out and boasted to the media that his family fortune would not be affected by any of the tax increases. Meanwhile, the hard-working entrepreneurs who started with nothing and built their way from the ground up were expected to pay taxes as high as 71%. It's as though the Finance Minister and the Prime Minister were at the top of the castle wall, looking down at the peasants and pulling up the ladder so that nobody could climb and join in the court. This is the imagery that the government creates when it protects the aristocratic wealth of the Prime Minister and the Finance Minister and prevents everyone else from having an opportunity to build a brighter future for themselves, the same way the Finance Minister's father and the Prime Minister's grandfather were able to build for their families. And this comes back to the essential debate we are having in this country. On the other side, we see a desire for a government-run economy, where people are able to get rich. Don't get me wrong. It's just how you get rich. In a free market economy, you get rich by having the best product. In a government-run economy, you get rich by having the best lobbyist. A free market economy allows you to get ahead on merit. In a government-run economy, you get ahead on connections. In a free market economy, you can only be better off if you sell people things that are worth more to them than what they pay for it. In a government-run economy, you get ahead by using political power to transform itself into financial power. A free market system has allowed literally billions of people to escape grinding poverty around the world and achieve a better future for all. It is the greatest poverty-fighting machine ever invented, and it is the best system we know. We understand that this government across the way does not believe in it. They believe in a government-directed economy where insiders get ahead using their political power, where the power of force is used to extract money out of the pockets of people who earned it and put it into the hands of those who have not. Ours is a struggle for the hardworking, middle-class people who put in a hard day's work for a better life, and we ask that the Prime Minister and Finance Minister prove that they share that same goal by revealing to all Canadians the vested interests that they possess so that all of us can ensure that they are acting in the public interest and not their narrow private interest. Thank you.